Hey everyone, welcome to the Mark Prater podcast, where our aim is to connect our global family of Sovereign Grace churches with our executive director. Mark, way back last November at the pastors' conference, even as we anticipate this year's pastors' conference drawing nearer by the day, at last, our State of the Union address, you talked about some concerns that you wanted to highlight, some issues that you wanted to make sure were on our radar to help us to grow as pastors in Sovereign Grace. And one of those was you wanted to highlight that you've observed that for a lot of guys, one challenge in interacting with our churches and with one another is a reluctance to have hard conversations. And I think there's reasons for that. And you certainly have insight, having observed across Sovereign Grace and been in many churches, and so you have some thoughts here, and you want to speak to us about this topic, specifically the issue of speaking frankly to one another, the need for us to be able to speak frankly to one another.
Yeah, it's something I wanted to talk about to kind of pick up my State of the Union last year, where I use hard conversation language. I just want to say it a little different way in this episode of the podcast, and potentially in my State of the Union, I say a little bit more. I'm still working my State of the Union, so I'm not sure where it will land, but it is
Yeah,
that ability to speak frankly with one another. And in this episode, I'm going to speak frankly. And I
thanks.
hope everyone listening knows that my motivation is one of the good of sovereign grace. I
Yeah,
believe by speaking frankly with one another, it's one of the ways that we speak the truth in love. And so there's a motivation on my part that is loving in nature, meaning that I think we'll be stronger and more united if we have this ability and grow in this ability to speak frankly with one another. And I say that just because of as you mentioned, just this unique seat I get to sit in Sovereign Grace, the
right.
executive director role. I have a lot of conversations with pastors and members of our churches. And I've noticed over time, and I've waited on this because I wanted to make sure it wasn't in, a couple of interactions, but fairly somewhat consistent enough anyway, that I see this area of growth that we have, which is to speak frankly with one another. So I'll talk as a leader. I'll talk with pastors in Sovereign Grace, and they may be talking about other pastors, whether that be on their pastoral team or in their region or in Sovereign Grace. As a pastor, I can have conversation with members of my church or of other churches, and they're talking about other members or they're talking about their pastor. And some of those conversations they're very well intended. Pastors are seeking counsel about the issue
Sure.
they're talking about. But often I find is I say to them, your next step is to go tell that person, that other pastor, or for a member to tell the other member what you just told me. That'll be
Yeah.
your first step. Here's some ways that you can do that. And I find many times that doesn't happen. And I've just sort of wondered, why is it that
Hmm.
we don't have this ability to speak more frankly with one another in sovereign grace? And it's an area that I just desire for us to grow in.
Excellent. Uh, there certainly are challenges to speaking frankly with others when it comes to challenging situations or observations about areas where growth is needed or critique. Uh, and we don't want to be, pastors who are out to put people in their place, and
Right.
to walk around with a flamethrower. Maybe the few of us are more inclined that way. I'm sure
Right.
you've seen a couple instances like that too,
I
but not
have.
broadly speaking. Broadly speaking, to encounter a Some Grace pastor is to encounter, grateful man, happy man, loves Jesus, loves people. So, what do you think it is that keeps us from having the frank conversations that we should be having?
Well, I want to talk about a couple of things, and I don't know if this is comprehensive, these two things. There may be more, but I wanted to mention
Yeah.
two. The first one is I wonder if we lack a biblical conviction to
Hmm.
have frank conversations. And I say that because you think about Ephesians 4, verses 14 and 15 would be one of the uh, places I would go into the Bible to develop a conviction for this area. And you've heard these verses before, Paul writing to the church in Ephesus. And he says in verse 14, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by
Hmm.
craftiness in deceitful schemes. Rather, so note the contrast, rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. And so there's a wonderful contrast in those two verses to keep others from being blown away, blown around
Hmm.
by the winds of doctrine that we see come and
Right.
go, or this deceitful schemes of cunning that we can all be exposed to. The way that you prevent that from happening, actually serve someone else, is to speak the truth in love. And you speak that truth frankly, but in love. And in love is very important. That reveals the motive of why you're doing it. That's the motive of this episode of the podcast. It also
Right.
reveals the method by which you deliver it. You deliver it in love. You deliver it with a spirit of gentleness,
Hmm.
yet without withholding truth, speaking frankly. So I just think that verse is really, really important. And it gives us, I think, at least a good biblical anchor for why
Hmm.
we should be able to speak frankly with one another. And, I was looking at one of the lectures that Spurgeon gave to his pastor's college students in his book, Lectures to My Students. And by the way, the older I get, and I go back to these lectures again and again, the more I'm amazed at how well Spurgeon prepared his PC students. Just a
Yeah,
quick
pretty
side
good.
note, but in his chapter entitled "The Minister's Ordinary Conversation," he says this. He says this to pastors: "Be strong in principles, earnest in your tone, and affectionate in heart. Let him," meaning the pastor, "speak out like a man and thank God for the privilege. There need be no reticence." So it's a very important quote. Strong in principles, you got a biblical conviction to speak frankly, earnest in tone, and then people experience your earnestness in the tone that you communicate with, and affectionate in heart. So you're speaking the truth in love, and those are all necessary to be effective, to have, I think, frank conversations. But it's really an area that I think that we need to grow in, and I think it begins with just forming a biblical conviction. I think the other reason that we don't have frank conversations, that to just use this to say it this way, second reason, niceness. We're just
Hmm.
nice guys. When we have nice members of churches, we want to be that way because we're followers of Christ. But I think
Yeah.
where niceness gets off is that we equate niceness with love.
Hmm.
And I don't think that's what Ephesians 4, verse 15 is talking about. To be loving someone means at times you have to say things to them that are hard and that will make them uneasy, but it's for their good.
Yeah.
And that's truly loving them. We have to say things knowing it will make people uneasy at times.
Hmm.
And that's okay. It doesn't mean that we don't do that in a harsh way. We want to do it that in love, as Spurgeon talks about, but we must do it. So another quote from Spurgeon in this same lecture. He says, "It is to be hoped that we shall never," meaning we are pastors, "we shall never, in our ordinary talk, any more than in the pulpit, be looked upon as nice sort of persons." He uses the word nice sort of persons, "whose business it is to make things agreeable all around, and who never have any possibility cause uneasiness to anyone, however ungodly their lives may be." So he's saying you've got to say things that are uneasy in times in ordinary conversation, one-on-one interactions, and from the pulpit. And when you do so, you're going to be serving those, you're going to be loving those that either you are responsible for their care as a pastor, or as a church member you are committed to in church membership, to help
Yeah.
one another grow in Christ. And that includes speaking frankly with one another in love.
Yes, I've often said to the church that I serve that I've read the New Testament a bunch of times, and I've never seen anywhere a command to be nice.
Right,
And
it's true.
the reality is, niceness can simply be a facade, for corruption, for a wolf. Wolves are nice guys. That's how they get a
Yeah.
hearing. And so we're not after niceness. We are after all of the virtues commended to us and in applying the gospel to our lives. That includes things like encouragement. And
Yeah.
I think this is we're in the category of encouragement. Maybe that's a surprising thought when in connecting these two things together. But even the author of Hebrews is saying, to encourage one another every day so we wouldn't be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin, which means that encouragement also includes people speaking frankly about
Mhm.
sin and challenges. And so we want to do exactly what God's word says to do in that regard. And the reality is, all we have to do is read the biblical authors to find men who have hearts full of love and affection and gratitude, starting with Jesus, who say very hard things. I mean, just I think maybe one of the greatest models we can look at is First Corinthians, which I'm starting to preach through part of here coming
Mm.
up. But he's going to say some really, really
Yes.
frank things to them, but they know that he loves them. And so you're not at all talking about, somehow leaving behind the distinctive culture of grace that we've enjoyed whatsoever. Actually, that's the foundation for frank conversations that people can receive as coming from a pastor who loves them, cares for them. We certainly don't want to be the kind of men who are known for constant critique, but straightforward conversation is necessary. Here's the deal. Oftentimes, you need to have a conversation, and you put it off. And I think other guys can relate to this. It starts to eat at you, and you think about it a lot, but it just continues to delay. And it's just this lingering sore spot in the back. I'm going to get to it. I don't want to get to it because it's going to be a challenging experience where there will be someone that you care about who potentially will be uneasy, like you talked about. So before we conclude, can you share some thoughts about the role of faith? As we're walking around aware, I'm sure these guys that need to have these conversations, they know that they should. It's challenging. And so to step over that line, set up that meeting, that opportunity, and to have that conversation means stepping out in faith, trusting God with that conversation, even as we prepare our hearts appropriately to be loving and careful. But as a guy, maybe there's a guy right now thinking about a conversation that he needs to have and has felt reluctant to have that conversation, even though he knows it needs to happen. How would you talk to that guy about the role of faith and having a Godward perspective, even as we think about having these frank conversations?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ben. Let me just pick up on, and first of all, in answering what you just said. When we get to a place where we're going to need to have a frank conversation, we've got one or two ways to go, right? We can have it, or we can not have it. And I think choosing to not have it is the most difficult path.
Yeah,
Neither may be easy, but
right.
that's the more difficult path. Not only
Yes,
does it linger in your own mind and your own soul, what I've seen over the years is actually, in many cases, the issue lingers and
that's right.
sometimes gets worse. And then it's more of a problem than it would have been if you would have had the hard conversation earlier on. So I just think you're choosing a more difficult path to avoid the frank conversation, and
Yeah.
and it does require faith. It's a trust in God. Faith is certain of what we hope for, and or yeah, certain of what we hope for and do not see. Essentially, is what
Mhm.
Hebrews is talking about. So there is this faith that in God that. Uh, what you hope for this person, whatever it might be, um, is something that is a part of your thinking, even if it's not received well, even if they
Yeah.
disagree with you. You have been faithful to bring them what you think is best for them to hear, whether it's an issue of character or gifting or whatever it might be, and trust God with the results. And if it's rejected, first of all, I wouldn't say that you failed. You were
Yeah.
faithful. And secondly, a lot of times people, they need time to process things.
Right. That's right.
And many times we'll come back and say, you know what, you were right about that. And they will actually respect you more and appreciate you more because you were the one person that was willing to say something to them that made them uneasy.
Yeah.
So it's sort of looking beyond the hard conversation and trusting that God will use it in His way and His time. I think
Yeah.
is one of the ways to think about it anyway.
Excellent. Yeah, we definitely want to give ourselves, we don't want to give ourselves a magical thinking that if we just ignore it long enough, it'll just go away. Um, and so appreciate your encouragement. Exactly what you're saying. We do our best to prepare our hearts to make sure that we are entering that kind of conversation with humility, with a discernible gratitude and humility, of course, even as we speak frankly. But trusting as well, like whatever happens, God has ordained the result, and so we can't control that. But I've had lots of conversations that I've dreaded, and in the end, actually, the relationship was strengthened because, like you're saying, there was this honesty. We're finally getting honest, and often there's things lingering unsaid but felt in relationships in the church because these conversations are being had. Or it could be someone decides that they don't appreciate you and it's time to move on. Whatever the case, if we do our best to be faithful to what God has called us to, which includes these frank conversations, we can trust and trust the outcome to God, and that's a relief for every pastor who is reluctant to have a frank conversation. So.
Yeah. One other thought regarding the question you asked about faith. Think about it this way: God has, in His kindness, spoken to us in many ways through His Word,
Mm,
and He says encouraging things. He says wonderful things. He says amazing things. But He also says things to us that are uneasy.
that's right.
And His motive is that of love. He does speak the truth to us through His Word. So faith, I think, then to have a frank conversation means that you believe you're reflecting the heart of God
Yes.
and the
Yeah,
truth of
that's
God,
good.
and that can please God.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mark, for not only your care in the way that you think about our family of churches, but also your willingness to help us to grow, because we certainly all feel that need to grow. I know you feel that need as well. And
Yeah.
so thank you for your encouragement on the podcast. Thank you, everyone, for checking out the pod. And we'll see you here next week, Lord willing. Bye for now.
Thank you for watching. If you have questions or comments, Mark would love to hear from you. For more videos like this, hit subscribe on YouTube or by email at markkprater.com.